Welcome back to my channel. In this tutorial, we will go over NGINX Proxy Manager. Now, what is NGINX Proxy Manager and what will it do for you? In this tutorial, I will go over a complete configuration using NGINX Proxy Manager in front of a couple AWS EC2 instances that will be running WordPress. All of these EC2s will be running Docker and Docker Compose inside. It's just the fastest way to get things going. So I recommend that you follow along, have a few tabs open. For example, install Docker Compose. You want to have your NGINX Proxy Manager website open, your AWS Management Console open, and we will go step by step. We'll take our time. We won't skip any steps. Here we go. So first, we want to go through the process of installing or creating several EC2 instances. And we could just use the free tier ones, these EC2s, and we will select 3. That's what we want to build, 3. And they will all have the same configuration. They will all have the standard software that we need for all of them. And here we're creating a security group because we need HTTP, we need HTTPS, we need SSH. We also need another port that we will use exclusively for NGINX Proxy Manager. So if we go to their website here, which is one of the tabs you want to have open, and we take a look at the setup instructions, it will tell us what ports we need open. It doesn't specifically say it, but if you look inside the Docker Compose file, you see that it's port 80, 443, and 81 are needed just for our instance that will be running NGINX Proxy Manager. So we will put that in here. And we want to allow from anywhere for now. And as you saw, we're going to build 3 of these instances. And we click on launch, we create a new key pair. We're starting from scratch, so nothing's available right now. We're not skipping any steps. And we'll call this key pair NGINX. You can call it whatever you want. Just remember to download it and save it in a good place. Now we take a look at our instances, and we could see that they are all running. And in order to not get lost, and you could see right off the bat, 3 instances, one can get lost. Like, what does what? Okay, so the best thing to do is give a name to each one. We'll call this one NGINX Proxy. The second one since we'll be running WordPress, we'll call it something like Test WP1 is what we can name this. And then the next one, we'll call it Test WP2. And now that we name all of our EC2 instances, it's easier to see what each one will do. Because when you're looking at the summary, the number that's there, the IP address, it can get very difficult to understand what each one is doing. And we will SSH into each one. So I recommend that you also have your command prompts open, whether you're using a Linux device or a Windows PC or a Mac. You copy the command that's here, and you need to make sure that you're in the directory where you downloaded the key for your device. And just follow the information that's here. You do sudo yum update. We've done that before in other videos. And we'll go step by step here. We won't leave anything behind. And we'll let it run the installation. And while it's running the installation, if you don't want to wait, you can actually go and start grabbing information from other EC2s or open up another command prompt window and do these things simultaneously. And actually, the best way to do this is to have a script that you could add to your EC2 when you're bringing them up when you launch them, and then it'll take care of all these updates for you. And like I said, all of these we want to do the same way. So in your other tab, you should have this Amazon Docker basic website, and we'll just follow the steps. We'll just copy and paste all the commands to all three of them so that we have the same setup. Nothing will be missing. So now that it's installed, we go back to the page. What do we need to do? We need to run the sudo service docker start, and we'll do that. Go back to the page, copy the next command. What do we need to do? We need to make sure that our EC2-user can run as sudo, so you don't have to keep typing in sudo. And then that is it, and we have to log out in order for it to take effect. And now let's go to the tab that has our EC2 information. And here is the second one. And this will be one of our WordPress sites, but like I mentioned, they will all be running Docker and Docker Compose. And we SSH into this device using the key pair that we downloaded. Same process. Do the sudo yum update. Make sure everything's up to date. Get it all installed. We'll follow up and install the AWS Docker packages. And we will also install Docker Compose. And here we go. We just copy and paste. This is very simple. And I like showing it this way because a lot of times it's hard to find the information, and you might need 3-4 tabs open from different websites to piece everything together. And then you could create your own little file, Notepad++, or you can, if you use OneNote, you can say, okay, this is the way to get everything working, and you put everything step by step for yourself. And here we go. We're installing everything that's needed. And you don't have to necessarily have to wait for it to finish installing for you to come to this tab now, copy your next command, and just be ready to paste it in. And with experience and doing this over and over again, you just know, you just flow with it. But make sure you don't skip any steps, because then you just end up troubleshooting for a very long time and don't even know why. And you can see Docker is installed at Docker info. And now we will do this with the third and final EC2 instance. And you see why putting a name to it is very important. Maybe right now it doesn't become so clear, but once you start working on these things, you might make an update or a change to the wrong device, and that's just going to get you fired if you're doing this for work. And here we go, same process. Just keep going. And you see I copied the command, and I'm waiting for it to finish installing here. And one of the benefits of ensuring that all three are running the applications you need, the standard applications, is so that you don't end up troubleshooting later on. Because we could set up one EC2 instead of SSHing in and out of different instances. It's just better get all three up to date, get them where they should be, and then we make the configurations or install the packages that are needed for that specific instance. That way we know that we have everything the same, everything's working. We make this change, we log out, log back in order for the change to take effect. And one thing that I forgot to do on all three of them is to install Docker Compose. So now I have to take one extra step, is SSH into all of them once again. No biggie. That's what I mentioned. That's what happens. We tend to forget things, but it's a good thing I forgot on all three of them. That way I'm not troubleshooting one that's not working for whatever reason, and it's because something was not installed. Now I'll just go through all three of them. So you do the command that's there, and I'll put a link to all these tabs. The Docker Compose installation, Docker for AWS installation and configuration. So we did that. And now I can up arrow and find my previous sessions and install the same ones. And we need Docker Compose. We will install everything using Docker Compose. So and we have to do the change mod to allow it to run, to become executable. Okay, so that's two of them. And let me see if I could find the previous one. And nope. I'll have to grab the IP address from the AWS dashboard. And it was the NGINX proxy that I did not do. Yes, I could see the previous commands. It shows me that I did not run this. I did not install Docker Compose on this one. And just a couple commands, and we did that, downloaded, and now we give it executable rights. And now we are ready to go. We will start by building our NGINX Proxy Manager EC2 instance. So we will SSH back into that instance. And we will also follow the steps that are mentioned in the website. And what we will do is we'll make a directory just for this NGINX. I call it NGINX PM. And there are a couple files that we have to provide. And we already know that we need a docker-compose.yaml file. But for this, we also need a config.json file. And it gives us all the information, and we're not changing a single thing. Don't use this in production. This is just to get it running. So we'll create this file, config.json file, and just copy and paste the information that's there. We exit out of there. And now we have to build the second file. See, it's a Docker Compose file. Just copy the whole configuration. And we have to call it docker-compose.yaml and just paste everything in there, just the same way you grabbed it. Now, obviously, if you make changes, you have to make sure that both files have the changes. Now, what's the next step? Just as simple as that. You run the Docker Compose up -d. and we get an error message. And this one's very easy to fix. It talks about the services.app.environment. And the reason is that we are not using this. So we have to comment that out. As soon as I comment that out, or you could delete the whole section, it will work. And if you notice, I didn't put the -d or -d. I like to run my Docker containers. The first time that I run it, I like to just see what's going on in the background, because you see a lot of error messages, you see what's going on, how it's getting built. And there's just so many little details that are available there without me having to go look in some log. It's just there for me. And it helps when I'm troubleshooting. It helps to see how the container reacts to certain calls, certain user activity. And now it should be ready to go. And we want to copy the public IP address, and it'll be the public address, and you have to put a :81. 81 is the management board. And then here you see that the default administrator will be admin@example.com, and the password is change me. And it will ask you to change the name of the administrator, change the email address. This was only for you to get in, and then it'll ask you to change the current password. You can put whatever you want. Just make sure that it is a very strong password. And hopefully you're doing this for testing purposes, and you will delete everything you create this time around. And now we don't have anything installed. We don't have any proxy hosts. And now it's when we have to go and start building our other EC2 instances. So now we'll start building our 2 WordPress servers. And we will create a directory for WordPress, and we will do the same setup on both of them. That way we can go step by step and show a real nice process of making this work. Because a lot of times you'll get up to a certain point and then realize that things are not working. And we'll make it very simple. We'll use this config file, make everything the same password, same username, same everything. Once again, you don't want to leave this exposed out on the internet in your instance where everyone can access. Do not use this in production. And it's very simple. Now that we have everything installed and it's configured, we just do docker-compose up. And we get a little error on line 1. I think I saw an extra letter in a spot there. Okay, it's off the screen, but I had put an X next to one of the words, and that's what happened. If I do a docker-compose up now, we will see it go through the process of installing. And we can go on to the next server. And same process, we will make a WordPress directory. We'll go into the directory and we'll create a Docker Compose file with the same information. This is the beautiful thing about running Docker. Once you get your config built, you can just keep doing it over and over again on as many EC2 instances as you want. And we'll let it run. And like I say, I always run Docker Compose up without the -D or -D, because I like to see what's going on in the background. I don't want to have to take a look at the logs or anything. I want to see it live while it's happening. And now while that's running, we can start checking other things. And we went to our first, and we see that it's running. And if you see in the Docker Compose file, you see that we're running the MySQL database locally as well. It's a volume, and it's there locally. And we'll just run it that way for now. A lot of people run those two things together. When you go out there and get one of those low-cost virtual machine providers, that's what you're getting. You're not getting anything fancy. So even this setup will be way better than probably anything you can purchase out there from any of the providers. And I mean low-end providers. And here we are, we're going to configure both of our WordPress instances. I'm jumping back and forth between them. And we'll just call one test WP1 and the other one test WP2. And here I'm looking at the NGINX proxy and the IP address, because we also want to configure certain settings. So I just copied that, and now that we're installing WordPress on these two devices, these two instances. And don't use weak passwords. Make sure you use something very secure. And they are both set up already, which is good. Okay, going back to the NGINX proxy, copy the IP address. And the reason we're copying this IP address is because now we're going into Route53, and we're going to create a couple records. And this is, I run the tuffnetworks.com DNS entries in Route53. I really like to use Route53 because it gives you options that you don't get anywhere else. And here we go, test WP1, and it'll be an IP address, our A record. And see that IP address? That's the IP address of NGINX. Okay, and we're going to define another one, test WP2. And same thing, IP address, and we will use the same IP address. And you see, both DNS entries are using the same IP address. Now, in a normal situation, you would only hit one server. So one server, one VM instance would be on the side doing absolutely nothing. And we don't want to have two WordPress servers doing the same thing. This example is of us running two different WordPress servers for two distinct clients. But we want to proxy their connection. We want to provide the SSL certificates. And here is the IP address. Here's the setup that we're doing for the first one. So you put in test WP1, the IP address of the server, the instance you want to get to. And then we want to request a new SSL certificate. And we want to force SSL. We want to agree to the Let's Encrypt terms of service. And you say OK. And after a few seconds, you will have a certificate. But there is one step that we have to go through. If you look at this, for whatever reason, force SSL is removed. So you always have to go back and verify that it's there. And then when we click on it, you get this. So things are starting to work. But we do have to go into the WordPress admin in order to change some settings, because right now it's still pointing to the IP address. And now we changed it to testwp1.tuffnetworks.com. And you would have to use your own domain and use a subdomain. So now you can't reach it through the IP address. And what's the destination? It's that first IP address for testwp1. And when we click on it, now we get into our WordPress site. TestWP1 is one server. And later on in this video, I will demonstrate have two distinct servers completely, because right now they look the same. The only thing that's different is it will be the TestWP1 or 2. But we actually want to demonstrate having different AWS instances, and you can do this on GCP as well. This is us just doing it on AWS at the moment. And once again, we put in the IP address. This is the second WordPress server, excuse me, testwp2.tuffnetworks.com. And we don't need a custom location. And we will request an SSL certificate. We request a new one. We force SSL. We agree to the terms of service. And you save it. Verify that everything's correct. So what this is saying is that any request that comes in on that subdomain will go to that IP address and that port. Now, as we all know, SSL works on port 443. When you see HTTP, that's port 80. So we're forwarding HTTP to the appropriate port, which is 80. But in order to have SSL, it has to respond or reply on 443. Well, that's what the NGINX Proxy Manager is doing for us. It is offloading your SSL encryption. It is providing the certificate. So yes, you have an extra server, but that server is providing a function and it's offloading it from your WordPress server. And once again, we have to go in here and change the WordPress address so that it is pointing to now the subdomain. And once we save it, we get kicked out because we can't use the IP address anymore. And we have to confirm that it's pointing to the right device. And there we go. So when you first look at it, unless you look at the top left corner, it looks just the same as the other one. And yes, this is what we want to do. We just want the two names to be different. But we could see that our connection is secure on both of them. Different IP addresses, but it's NGINX Proxy Manager that is responding. Now, NGINX Proxy Manager is just the front end to basically the configuration that you would have in the back as a config file. But it makes it so easy to be able to do this. Now, when we do an nslookup, we will see which IP address replies. So if you're not familiar, an nslookup is the opposite of putting in an IP address. It gives you the name that is in DNS. So if you want to find out who Cisco.com is, you do nslookup cisco.com and it gives you an IP address. nslookup amazon.com, and it gives you the IP address for that, or multiple IP addresses. And as you can see, NGINX Proxy is this 3.86.45.17 IP address. That was what we saw in nslookup. And really, this is just one of many ways that we could provide an SSL certificate to a website. But now we're going to review our security groups because we want to do something different. We don't want to allow any direct access to our WordPress instances. So what we will do is we'll create a new security group, and we'll just give it a name to identify what it does. So this is NGINX only. What does this mean? This security group will only allow the NGINX Proxy Manager to talk to the WordPress servers. So in essence, this means that there is no way to access the WordPress servers from the outside. You have to go through the proxy server or instance. And as you can see, I'm allowing port 80 from 3.86.45.17, which is our NGINX instance. And I removed the other. And now we will go into our EC2s and change the security groups so that it only has this one security group. And let's put a description in here. It's good practice to always put it, because we tend to forget why we have that IP address in there. And it's something I like about this AWS dashboard. It allows us to add these things. Okay, so now we will go into our instances. And once we go here, we'll select them. And then we'll change the security groups. For whatever reason that the dashboard refreshed. And here I am trying to select 2 and change the security group on 2 instances, but it will not let me. It's grayed out. Didn't see that coming. But now we'll just do them one at a time. And still no. So even after a refresh, can't do it. So we'll do it one at a time. Networking, security, change security groups. And we have to add one, which is the one that we just created. And we have to remove the other one. So as you see, it only allows the NGINX. And same thing for the second one. We change security groups. We add the new one, NGINX only. And we remove the previous one we created when we launched these instances. Okay, so now that is set up, and it might take a few seconds for it to become active, but it's rather quick. And we go to test WP1. And we try to refresh, and it is still working. Now remember, I'm trying to get to this website from the office, from an external site. This is hosted on AWS. And it's still refreshing, it's still working fine. But what happens is that port 80 or HTTP is only allowed from the NGINX server. My DNS entries in Route53 point test WP1 to the NGINX Proxy Manager server, which then forwards this as a secure connection. Right? It receives it, it offloads the SSL certificate, and it provides that encryption. And as you can see, I could still install anything I want. Just pick a random plugin. And that's because by default, the security groups allow all outbound access. It's the inbound that we were concerned with, and we're blocking all inbound. And if I come here to my SSH window, you can't tell, but I'm hitting enter and I can't go anywhere because my SSH is will time out eventually, because SSH is not allowed. Remember, only port 80 is allowed from the proxy manager. And by default, there's an implicit deny all. So if you don't specify a port, everything else is blocked. So this is a good test to run to make sure that your security groups are working. And we want to test WP2 as well. And we want to go into the admin interface. And it's got its SSL certificate. So it's a secure website. People can go to your website with confidence and enter their username and password. I really don't understand how there are providers out there that don't offer an SSL certificate by default. There is no reason not to have this. And it's absolutely free, which is the other thing. I mean, SSL certificates, several years ago, you had to pay for them. And depending on the level of security, it would cost money every year. And depending on the level of security you wanted, you had to mail in documentation. You had to prove who you were. You had to jump through so many hoops just to get an SSL certificate for your website. And because of that, many people just let it be at HTTP. And the information from users was just sent in clear text. So if you ever see HTTP or you get a warning that the website is not secure, it's because it isn't secure. And as you can see here, I tried to SSH back into the WP2 or test WP2 and unsuccessful because SSH is not allowed at all. Only port 80. So basically that access list means that there is no external access to your test WP1 and WP2 instances. You have to route or go through the NGINX server. And now we'll continue configuring our WordPress instances. And now we will make them different just to show you an example of how you could have multiple customers routing through your NGINX proxy, and you're offering them the security that they deserve. Like I said, there is no reason to have a website running on HTTP only. Absolutely no reason. And that's why Google, Firefox, and Safari will alert you and let you know that the website is not secure. Okay, so here we are on both of our websites, test WP1 and test WP2, and we'll activate different themes for them so that there is a clear distinction. So even though it's the same IP address and these are different servers, but once again, we're going through the NGINX proxy. And we'll install this theme, we'll activate it, and on WP1, we'll install something else. And there's test WP2 with one theme. And WP1 will install a little something maybe a little bit better looking. Let's put this one and see what this looks like. And we actually have to activate another little feature on this. We'll import one of their already made websites. And one thing that I notice right off the bat is the speed with which this flows. There is no lag. There is no slowdown. Actually, it runs faster on this setup than if you were to run your SQL, your WordPress, and your NGINX Docker containers on the same machine. So right now, as you saw, each VM is running 2 Docker containers. NGINX Proxy Manager runs 2. It runs the NGINX Proxy Manager and the database. The 2 WordPress servers run 2 containers, the WordPress container and your MySQL container. But in certain setups, and I think I did a video about this, where you have NGINX one container and you have WordPress and you have MySQL. You could start offloading things from your websites. It could be that I just run the WordPress container in one and then just point to like a RDS SQL. And then that way you're offloading. So you don't need a stronger or faster or beefier VM instance. You just need to offload certain things. And that's when we get into the area of microservices. You start separating everything. And I really like this setup. And just running NGINX on its own server, having this nice proxy manager, this nice front end, just helps and speeds up the process of everything. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. It's a bit lengthy, but you achieved a lot. And if you get stuck anywhere, please let me know in the comments. And you could pause the video in certain parts and try it again. And like I always say, and I recommend, build it, destroy it, build it, destroy it. It's the only way to continue to learn. Maybe not the only way, but it's one of the best ways to learn. Reading a book, reading websites is not the way to go. You have to build it. Please subscribe, give me a thumbs up, ask me any questions you want in the comments down below.